Some dreams don't cost much, but they demand everything you have. For Lily Harper, that price was 50 crumpled dollars. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed in their small two-bedroom apartment, counting the bills for the fourth time, as if hoping they might multiply if she stared hard enough. They didn't. They never did. $50, scraped together from months of skipping lunches, walking instead of taking the bus, and pretending she didn't notice the holes in Emma's shoes. $50 that stood between her and another night of loneliness. $50 that would buy her a chance at something she hadn't dared to believe in for 8 long years. Hope. The apartment was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the clock on the wall. Lily's life had been measured in moments like this, quiet, controlled, and predictable. After the divorce, she had built a fortress around her heart brick by brick, filling the cracks with routine and responsibility. She worked 2 jobs, one as an administrative assistant during the day and part-time data entry from home after Emma went to bed. Every cent was accounted for, every sacrifice carefully calculated to keep their small world from collapsing. Dreams, she had decided long ago, were luxuries she couldn't afford. But tonight, something was different. Tonight, she was breaking one of her own rules. Tonight, she was spending $50 on something as fragile and foolish as possibility.
"Mommy, you look like a princess."
The voice came from the doorway, small and certain, and Lily's heart softened at the sight of her 7-year-old daughter leaning against the frame. Emma's eyes, a deep shade of green that had always reminded Lily of summer forests, were wide with wonder. She clutched her stuffed rabbit in one hand and watched her mother as if witnessing something magical. Lily smiled, though the gesture felt foreign on her lips. "A princess, huh? That's a new one."
"It's true,"
Emma insisted, stepping closer to study the black dress Lily had borrowed from their neighbor, Mrs. Wong. It was a little too tight at the waist, and the zipper stuck halfway up the back, but with a few bobby pins in her hair and the cheapest drugstore makeup she could find, Lily almost looked like the woman she used to be, before heartbreak had carved weariness into her features. She turned back to the small mirror on the dresser. The reflection that stared back was unfamiliar. Not the tired single mother who counted coupons and stretched paychecks until they screamed, but someone braver, someone who believed she might still deserve love. "Do you remember what we talked about?" Lily asked gently, crouching to meet Emma's eyes. Emma nodded, her curls bouncing.
"Mrs. Carter will watch me, and you're going to meet someone new, maybe even a friend."
Lily swallowed hard. The conversation had been simple in words but complicated in meaning. She hadn't promised anything. Not love, not a relationship, not even a second date. But she wanted Emma to understand that this wasn't just about dinner with a stranger. It was about trying again, about believing, if only for one night, that her life could be more than just survival.
"Are you excited?"
Emma asked, her voice bubbling with enthusiasm.
"Are you nervous? Did you use the perfume sample from the magazine? The one that smells like promises?"
Lily laughed softly, despite the knot in her stomach.
"Promises?"
Emma nodded with the solemnity of someone much older.
"It smells like good things can happen if you're brave."
Brave. It wasn't a word Lily had used to describe herself in a long time. But maybe bravery wasn't about grand gestures. Maybe it was about this: putting on a borrowed dress, stepping out into the unknown, and risking her heart one more time. As Lily grabbed her worn purse and slipped the $50 inside, Emma's words echoed in her mind. "The right man will love us both." It was a child's wish, innocent and impossible, but it lingered like a heartbeat beneath her ribs. At 7:15, she stood by the door, her hand on the knob, her heart hammering in her chest. 8 years ago, she had walked away from love with a newborn in her arms and no idea how to build a future. Tonight, she was walking toward the possibility of something new.
"Wish me luck,"
she whispered. Emma wrapped her arms around her mother's waist and held her tight.
"You don't need luck, Mommy. You just need someone who sees you the way I do."
Lily's throat tightened as she stepped out into the cool night air. the weight of the $50 in her purse heavier than gold. She had no idea what waited for her beyond the doors of that restaurant. All she knew was that tonight, for the first time in 8 years, she was choosing to hope. And hope, fragile and foolish as it was, might be the bravest thing she had ever done. The night air carried a slight chill as Lily stood outside Moretti's Italian restaurant, clutching her purse like it contained the last piece of her courage. The warm glow of the interior lights spilled onto the sidewalk, and the smell of garlic bread drifted through the air, making her stomach twist with a mix of nerves and hunger. It had been 8 years since she had been on a date, and every step toward the door felt heavier than the last. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the borrowed black dress over her hips, whispering to herself that this was just dinner. Nothing more, nothing less. She was here to meet someone new, someone kind, someone who might remind her what it felt like to be seen, not just needed. Inside the restaurant, laughter and soft music wrapped around her like a world she hadn't been part of in too long. Couples leaned close over candlelit tables, families shared meals without checking price tags, and waiters glided between them with practiced ease. She felt like an outsider in her own life, a visitor peering into a world that had moved on without her. The hostess greeted her with a bright smile and led her toward a small table by the window where a single place setting waited.
Reservation under Harper,
Lily said, trying to keep her voice steady. She had arrived right on time because punctuality was one of the few luxuries she could afford. At 7:30 sharp, she sat down, her heart thudding so loudly she was sure people could hear it. Every time the door opened, her pulse jumped. Every laugh from a nearby table made her feel more self-conscious. Minutes passed, then more. She ordered water, then breadsticks. By 8 o'clock, her date still hadn't arrived. Doubt began to creep in like a slow leak beneath a locked door. Maybe he wasn't coming. Maybe he had taken one look at her picture and decided she wasn't worth the effort. Maybe this was the universe's way of reminding her that people like her didn't get happy endings. At 8:05, she considered leaving. At 8:10, she pulled her phone from her purse and read the message from Zoe again. He's successful but humble. He wants someone genuine. Be yourself. Lily almost laughed at the irony. Being herself had never been enough for anyone before. Then at 8:15, just as she reached for her purse to leave, a voice behind her said her name. Soft. Familiar. Like a word she hadn't heard in years but had never forgotten. Lily. Time stopped. Her breath caught. She turned slowly, and the world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Standing there holding a bouquet of white roses was James Carter. The man she had loved. The man who had broken her heart. The man she had spent 8 years trying to forget. For a moment she wondered if she was dreaming. James looked different, but also heartbreakingly the same. The sharp edges of youth had softened into something deeper and stronger, but the green eyes that had once made her believe in forever still held that same intense gaze. His suit was perfectly tailored, his posture confident and commanding, but there was something else too, something uncertain in the way he held the flowers, like a man stepping into a memory he wasn't sure he deserved.
James,
she whispered, barely able to form the word.
What are you doing here?
I think I'm supposed to be meeting someone, he said, his voice low and careful. Reservation under Carter. Blind date. But maybe there's been a mistake. There it was again. The universe playing its cruel tricks. This wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a new chapter. This was the past she had spent 8 years burying, walking back into her life with roses in hand. She wanted to run. She wanted to scream. She wanted to tell him that he had no right to stand there looking at her like that after everything. But her body refused to move. Her heart refused to listen to reason.
I'm waiting for someone,
she said finally, though her voice shook. So am I, he replied, and before she could protest, he sat down across from her, setting the bouquet gently on the table between them. The white roses were her favorite. He knew that. He had always known that. The silence between them was thick, heavy with words they hadn't said and wounds they hadn't healed. She stared at the roses, unable to stop herself from wondering why he had remembered such a small detail. Why, after all this time, something inside him still remembered the things that once made her smile. 8 years, James said quietly, breaking the silence.
8 years, and I still think about you every day.
The words hit her like a punch, and before she could stop herself, she looked up, meeting his eyes. What she saw there wasn't arrogance or regret, but something deeper. Something like longing. Something like hope. And for the first time that night, Lily realized the evening was no longer about a blind date. It was about fate colliding. With the past she thought she'd escaped. It was about a love story that had ended unfinished, now demanding to be rewritten. And somewhere deep down, a small, frightened part of her wondered if she was strong enough to read the next chapter. The roses sat between them like a secret neither of them was ready to speak aloud, their soft petals glowing in the candlelight while the weight of 8 years pressed down on the small table. Lily's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. James Carter was sitting across from her again, the man who had once been her entire future and then became her deepest regret. The world outside the restaurant kept moving, people laughing over plates of pasta, couples clinking wine glasses, but at table 12, time had stopped. James looked older now in a way that made him more dangerous, more magnetic. The boyish charm that once won her heart had been replaced by the quiet authority of a man who had built empires and carried the weight of power with ease. Yet beneath the polished exterior she could still see the man she used to know, the one who had held her hand when she was scared, who had kissed her forehead when the world felt too big. It was that man she had loved, not the billionaire sitting before her.
"You're angry?"
he said, gently breaking the silence. His voice still had that deep, steady calm that used to ground her and infuriate her at the same time.
"I'm confused,"
she replied, refusing to meet his gaze.
"I came here to meet someone new, to start over, and instead I get you."
"Maybe that's not an accident," he said, and there was something in his tone that made her chest tighten.
"Don't,"
she snapped.
"Don't make this sound like fate. Fate doesn't abandon you when you're 6 months pregnant.
Fate doesn't disappear and sign divorce papers from another continent." The words hit their mark, but James didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly, as if he had rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in his head. "You're right," he admitted. "I made mistakes. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought success meant sacrifice and that building something bigger than us would make the pain worth it. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." Lily felt her throat tighten, but she forced herself to stay composed. "You left me to face everything alone. You left before you even knew what everything was." His eyes darkened at her words, and for a fleeting second she saw something she didn't expect in them. Regret so deep it looked like it might swallow him whole. "Do you think I haven't lived with that every day?" he asked quietly. "Do you think I haven't wondered what I threw away? I told myself I was doing it for us, but the truth is I was a coward. I was terrified of failing at being a husband, terrified of becoming my father. So I ran. And I've been running ever since." Lily wanted to scream at him, wanted to tell him that sorry wasn't enough. But the truth was, she had imagined this conversation countless times too, and none of her rehearsed speeches felt right now, because underneath all the pain, a single terrifying thought had begun to bloom. What if she had never stopped loving him? The waiter approached then, interrupting the storm that was building between them. "Are you ready to order?" he asked politely.
"I'm not staying,"
Lily said automatically, but James spoke over her. "Yes," he said firmly. "We'll have the house special and a bottle of Chianti." Then softer to her,
"Please stay, just for dinner. If you never want to see me again after tonight, I'll disappear. But give me this one evening to tell you the things I should have said 8 years ago."
The sincerity in his voice made her hesitate. Against her better judgment, she sank back into her seat. She told herself it was curiosity, nothing more. But deep down she knew it was something else, something older and far more dangerous. As the waiter walked away, James reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box, placing it gently on the table beside the roses. Lily stared at it, suspicion clawing at her chest.
What's that?
She asked, her voice barely above a whisper.
Not what you think,
he said, opening it to reveal a delicate silver locket shaped like a teardrop. Inside was a tiny photo of them on their wedding day, smiling and invincible.
I've carried this every day since the divorce, a reminder of the only thing I ever did right.
Lily's breath caught in her throat and she hated herself for how much that simple gesture shook her.
You can't rewrite the past with gifts, she said.
I'm not trying to, James replied, his gaze locking onto hers with unshakable resolve.
I'm trying to earn a chance to rewrite the future.
Before she could respond, her phone buzzed on the table. A text message from Emma flashed across the screen, and the words made her blood run cold.
Mommy, I did something. Please don't be mad.
Her hands went cold as she read it again. Something about the message felt off, almost calculated. She looked up to find James watching her with a strange expression, a flicker of realization in his eyes.
Reservation under Harper, he said slowly, piecing it together. Someone called my assistant this morning to confirm it. Someone named E. Harper.
The room tilted around her as the truth slammed into place.
E. Harper. Emma Harper. Her brilliant, too clever daughter.
This was no coincidence. This dinner, this meeting, this entire night had been orchestrated.
God,
Lily whispered, pressing a hand to her forehead.
She planned this.
And for the first time since James had walked back into her life, Lily felt the ground shift beneath her feet because this was no longer just about her past. It was about their daughter. It was about secrets too heavy for small shoulders and the terrifying possibility that fate hadn't arranged this reunion. Emma had. The restaurant seemed to dissolve around Lily as the truth sank in. The laughter from nearby tables felt distant. The warm glow of candlelight faded, and all she could hear was the echo of her daughter's text repeating in her mind.
I did something. Please don't be mad.
She stared at the screen, her hands trembling the same way they had on the night she signed the divorce papers 8 years ago. Back then, she had been terrified of a future without James. Now, she was terrified of what their daughter had set in motion. James leaned forward, his voice low and steady, but his eyes betrayed the storm building inside him.
She planned this.
Emma planned this. Lily swallowed hard.
It's impossible. She's 7. She couldn't have.
She could, he interrupted. She's smart. Too smart. And if she figured out who I was. The sentence hung between them unfinished and heavy. They both knew what it meant. Emma wasn't just playing matchmaker. She was searching for something bigger than romance. She was searching for answers. Lily's heart twisted painfully. Emma had always been curious, always asking questions about the man in the photographs she wasn't allowed to see. She had noticed the way Lily's voice changed when his name came up. And more than once, she had said quietly at bedtime,
Mommy, I wish I had a daddy.
Lily had brushed it off every time, believing she was protecting her daughter from disappointment. Now it seemed that protection had turned into a secret too heavy for a child to carry. James pushed his plate aside, forgotten untouched.
Where is she now? With Mrs. Carter?
Lily whispered, still in shock.
She was supposed to stay the night.
Then why does this feel like she's not? James muttered, glancing toward the window. The thought hit them both at the same time, and they moved in unison, standing so quickly their chairs scraped against the floor. They rushed outdoors into the cool night air, scanning the street like two people chasing ghosts. And then Lily's breath caught. Across the street, under the yellow glow of a streetlight, a small figure stood hugging a stuffed rabbit tight to her chest. Emma. She was watching them with wide, hopeful eyes. And next to her on the bench was an empty cup of hot chocolate from the cafe they used to visit as a family.
Emma!
Lily called out, her voice shaking as she hurried toward her. The little girl's smile was radiant and heartbreaking all at once.
I wanted to see you both together,
she said softly when they reached her.
I thought if I came here maybe you'd talk. Maybe you'd remember.
Lily knelt in front of her daughter, her hands trembling as she tucked a strand of hair behind Emma's ear.
Sweetheart, you can't just come here without telling me. I was so worried.
Emma bit her lip and looked down at the ground.
I'm sorry, Mommy, but I had to. You always look sad when you talk about him. And when I see other kids with their dads, I feel empty. I thought maybe if I brought you together, you'd stop being sad, and maybe I'd stop feeling empty too.
James crouched beside them, his breath catching as he really looked at Emma for the first time. Her deep green eyes were a mirror of his own. The shape of her smile, the tilt of her chin, the stubborn set of her jaw, all of it was his. He had missed everything. Her first steps, her first words, every bedtime story, every scraped knee, every school project. All those moments had happened without him. And now here she was, not a baby, but a little girl standing in front of him asking for something he wasn't sure he deserved. "Emma," he whispered, and the sound of his own voice almost broke him.
Did your mom tell you who I am?
Emma shook her head slowly.
Not exactly, but I figured it out. I saw an old photo of you and Mommy, and then I saw a
picture of you online. You look the same. And when I asked Mommy if you were a bad person, she cried. People don't cry over bad people. The air seemed to leave James's lungs. He turned to Lily, his voice barely more than a breath.
You never told her. I wanted to,
Lily said, her own voice shaking.
But how do you explain to a little girl that her father chose a company over her? How do you explain why he never showed up?
James flinched like the words were knives, but he didn't look away.
Because I was a coward, he said quietly. Because I was so afraid of failing you both that I failed you worse than I ever imagined. And if you hate me for that, I deserve it.
Emma looked between them, confusion and hope battling in her young face.
Are you my daddy?
She asked finally, her voice barely louder than a whisper. The question landed like a thunderclap. James swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he reached for her. Yes, he said. Yes, sweetheart, I am. For a moment the world stood still. Then Emma stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around him with all the trust and love a child could offer. And in that instant, the weight of 8 years crashed over them both. The regret, the missed chances, the love that had never truly died. Lily watched them with tears streaming down her cheeks and 1,000 emotions warring inside her. Joy, anger, fear, hope. Because this was no longer about her heart or his. This was about the tiny pair of arms clinging to James, as if she had been waiting for him her entire life. And as the three of them stood there beneath the soft glow of the streetlight, Lily understood one thing with terrifying clarity. Everything had changed. The past they had both tried to outrun had caught up with them. And now, it demanded to be faced, together. The night wind swept gently through the empty streets, but inside Lily's chest a storm was raging. She had spent years building walls around her heart, and now with one innocent question, those walls had cracked beyond repair. Are you my daddy? The sound of Emma's small trembling voice echoed in her mind long after they had returned home. She tucked her daughter into bed like she always did, but tonight Emma clung to James's hand, refusing to let go until her eyes finally fluttered closed. And when she did, James remained by her side, staring down at the sleeping girl as if memorizing every detail he had missed. Lily stood quietly by the doorway watching him. This man who had once walked away without a second glance now looked like someone terrified of losing everything again. The silence between them was heavy and suffocating until James finally spoke. How old was she when she took her first steps? He asked, without turning around.
10 months,
Lily answered softly. She fell every time, but she kept trying. She's stubborn like you. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Did she say Mama first, or Dada?
Mama,
Lily whispered. But she used to say Da when she was tired. I used to tell myself she was calling for you. James closed his eyes as if the weight of those words was too much to bear. I missed everything.
Yes,
Lily said, her voice firm.
You did.
He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw the man she once knew, stripped bare of arrogance and excuses.
I don't want to miss another second. I want to know her. I want to be here for her birthdays and her nightmares and her scraped knees. I want to earn the right to be her father.
Wanting isn't enough, Lily said, stepping closer.
You don't just walk in after 8 years and expect forgiveness. You're a stranger to her, James. You're a stranger to me.
Then let me change that, he said.
Let me prove that I'm not the man who left. I will do anything.
Lily stared at him for a long time, searching his face for a lie, but all she saw was raw truth. And that terrified her more than any betrayal ever had, because if he was telling the truth, then maybe she still had feelings for him. And if she still had feelings for him, he could break her all over again.
Good night, James,
she whispered, and turned away before her heart could betray her. The following days were a blur of tension and fragile hope. James showed up every morning before work to walk Emma to school. He learned how she liked her pancakes, slightly burned. He sat through her endless stories about science projects and dance classes. And every night when Lily peeked through Emma's door, she found them reading together or building pillow forts, as if 8 years had been nothing but a long pause between chapters. But as the days passed, a different storm began to brew. Emma's teachers started calling. She was distracted in class, drawing pictures of families with 3 people holding hands. At night, Lily heard her crying quietly into her pillow. And one evening when James was late for dinner, Emma didn't eat at all.
She's scared,
Lily said one night after Emma had gone to bed.
She's scared you'll leave again.
James's jaw tightened.
I won't.
Do you promise?
With everything I have,
he said. But promises had failed them before, and in the weeks that followed, Lily realized that love alone might not be enough to heal the damage. The cracks in Emma's heart were deeper than either of them had imagined. And one afternoon, everything shattered. It started as a normal day. Lily was folding laundry when the phone rang. It was the school nurse.
Emma collapsed on the playground,
the woman said, her voice trembling.
We've called an ambulance.
Lily's world tilted. The laundry basket crashed to the floor as she grabbed her keys and ran out the door. Her heart hammered against her ribs, every second feeling like an eternity. By the time she reached the hospital, James was already there, his face pale, his hands shaking. "They're running tests," he said, his voice barely a whisper.
"They don't know what's wrong."
Hours crawled by in a blur of white coats and hushed conversations until finally the doctor appeared, his expression grave but gentle. "There's nothing physically wrong with your daughter," he said carefully. "But her body is reacting to extreme emotional stress. It's something we call broken heart syndrome. In children, it can be triggered by fear trauma or deep sadness." Lily's knees buckled and she clutched the edge of the chair to keep from collapsing. Broken heart syndrome. Her little girl's heart was literally breaking under the weight of their choices. The doctor continued speaking, but Lily barely heard him. All she could see was Emma lying small and fragile in a hospital bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped steadily against the silence. And beside her, James stood motionless, tears streaming down his face as he stared at the daughter he had only just begun to know.
"This is our fault,"
Lily whispered brokenly.
"No,"
James said, his voice cracking.
"This is mine."
And in that moment he understood the true cost of his mistakes. It wasn't measured in lost years or missed milestones. It was measured in the fragile heartbeat of a little girl who had loved him long before she ever knew his name. And if she didn't survive this, he knew he would never forgive himself. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound that dared to exist in the sterile hospital room. Lily sat by Emma's bedside, gripping her daughter's tiny hand as if sheer will could keep her tethered to the world. James stood at the foot of the bed, motionless and pale, his suit jacket tossed carelessly over a chair, his eyes fixed on the girl he had barely begun to know. The steady rhythm of the machine felt like a countdown, each beat a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything.
"Please wake up, baby,"
Lily whispered, brushing a strand of hair from Emma's forehead.
Mommy's here, Daddy's here, we're not going anywhere.
The word daddy caught in James's chest like a blade twisting deep inside. It was the first time she had said it aloud, and though it should have felt like a gift, it only deepened the ache of his regret. He had missed 7 birthdays, 7 bedtimes, 7 Christmas mornings, and now he was begging for one more chance to make it right. The doctor's words echoed in Lily's mind long after he had left. Broken heart syndrome, triggered by emotional trauma. It's reversible, but only with stability and reassurance. Stability. Reassurance. 2 things they had both failed to give their daughter. Hours bled into days, and still Emma remained in her fragile state, slipping in and out of consciousness. Sometimes she murmured in her sleep, calling for her mother. Other times she cried softly, whispering words that shattered James's heart.
Please don't leave me. Please don't leave.
On the 3rd night, exhaustion finally forced Lily to close her eyes for a few minutes in the chair beside the bed. When she woke, James was still awake, still watching Emma as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away.
She's fighting,
he said quietly. She's stronger than I ever was.
She shouldn't have to be strong,
Lily replied, her voice raw.
She's a child. All she's ever wanted was a family, and we failed to give her that.
James turned toward her, his eyes haunted.
Then let's give it to her now. Not tomorrow, not next week. Now. Let's stop pretending we're strangers and start being parents.
Lily's breath caught. The word parents felt heavy and dangerous. She had spent so long doing it alone that the idea of sharing it terrified her.
You don't just get to step back into her life and fix everything. It doesn't work like that.
I know, he said, his voice breaking.
But I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for a chance. I'll prove myself every day for the rest of my life if that's what it takes. I don't care if you hate me, Lily. I just want my daughter to have her father.
The walls she had built around her heart trembled but didn't yet fall. She wanted to believe him, but promises had been broken before. Still, when Emma stirred in her sleep, her small hand twitching as if reaching for something, Lily reached out too. James's fingers brushed hers, and neither of them pulled away. The next morning, a nurse gently suggested that Emma might respond to familiar voices and touch, so they tried. Lily read her favorite bedtime stories until her voice grew hoarse. James sang softly a lullaby he remembered from his childhood, his voice unsteady but full of emotion. And when Emma's eyelids fluttered and her lips parted with a faint whisper, both of them leaned closer, desperate to hear.
Together,
she murmured, barely audible.
I want us together.
The words struck them like lightning. It wasn't just a wish. It was a plea. Their daughter's heart wasn't breaking because of illness. It was breaking because the 2 people she loved most in the world were still living in separate worlds. That night, as rain tapped against the hospital windows, James and Lily sat side by side for the first time since their wedding day. The silence between them wasn't hostile anymore. It was heavy with memories, with mistakes, with unspoken apologies. And slowly, conversation replaced the silence. They talked about the past, not with anger, but with honesty. He told her about the fear that drove him away. She told him about the loneliness that nearly crushed her. They talked about Emma, about the woman she was growing into, and the future she deserved. When the sun rose over the horizon, painting the sterile room in shades of gold, Emma stirred again. This time her eyes opened. Blinking sleepily, she looked from her mother to her father, confusion flickering before recognition took its place.
Daddy,
she whispered weakly. James was at her side in an instant, tears spilling down his face.
I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here, and I'm never leaving again.
Her tiny fingers wrapped around his and then around Lily's, pulling their hands together until they were clasped as one.
Promise me,
she whispered.
Promise you'll stay together.
Lily's throat tightened. She looked at James and saw not the man who had left, but the man who was ready to fight for their family. And in that moment she knew that this wasn't about forgiveness anymore. It was about healing.
I promise,
James said firmly.
I promise too,
Lily whispered. Emma's eyelids grew heavy again, but this time there was a faint smile on her lips as she drifted back into sleep. And as they sat there, hand in hand, something shifted between them. For the first time in 8 years, they weren't two broken people clinging to the past. They were a family fighting for a future. But even as hope began to bloom, a shadow loomed quietly in the distance. James's world, the one he had built in her absence, was about to collide with the fragile peace they were creating. And when it did, the cost of keeping their promise might be higher than either of them was prepared to pay. The first rays of morning light spilled through the hospital blinds, painting the room in soft gold. But for Lily, the dawn brought no peace. Emma was awake now, recovering slowly, her heartbeat steady but fragile, just like the promises they had whispered at her bedside. For 3 days, James had not left the hospital. He slept in a chair beside the bed and refused every meeting call and message that came through his phone. It was as if nothing beyond those white walls existed. But the world outside was not patient, and it was about to come crashing in. On the 4th day, as Lily helped Emma sip warm broth, a sharp knock echoed through the room. The door opened before either of them could answer, and a man in a tailored suit stepped in holding a tablet and wearing an expression of carefully contained frustration. "Mr. Carter?" he said curtly, ignoring Lily's questioning gaze. "You've missed 4 board meetings and the Asia deal is falling apart. The shareholders are demanding an explanation." Jamin didn't even glance at him. He was gently brushing Emma's hair back from her forehead, his focus unwavering. "Tell them I'm unavailable." "You're the CEO," the man said stiffly. "You're never unavailable." "Then maybe they need a new CEO," James murmured without looking up. The words hung heavy in the air. Lily's breath caught as she watched the man's face pale. He opened his mouth to protest, but James's tone turned to steel. "This is where I need to be. If the board can't understand that, then I don't want their company." The man hesitated, then turned sharply and left, but not before Lily noticed the flicker of panic in his eyes. Something told her this wasn't the end of it. And she was right. That night, James stepped into the hallway to make a call. When he returned, there was a shadow in his gaze and his voice was quieter than usual. "They're calling an emergency vote to remove me as CEO," he said. Lily's heart clenched. "Because of us?" "Because of her," he corrected softly, nodding toward Emma. "Because they think a man who chooses his daughter over a billion-dollar deal is too emotional to run an empire." She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to tell him to go back to his company to protect what he had built. Another part, a deeper, fiercer part, wanted him to stay right where he was. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing power or prestige. He was fighting for his family. "I'm not leaving," he said before she could speak. "Not now. Not ever." Emma's recovery was slow, but steady. With each passing day, she grew stronger, her laughter returning like sunlight breaking through clouds. And with every shared meal, every bedtime story, every small victory, their fragile family began to knit itself together again. James and Lily even started talking about things they had avoided for years: therapy, co-parenting, maybe even a second chance at love. Just as hope began to feel real, the storm that had been brewing finally struck. One evening, as they left the hospital together, a black car pulled up to the curb and a woman stepped out. She was tall, elegant, and radiated a polished coldness that made Lily's stomach tighten instantly. James froze when he saw her, and the color drained from his face. "Clara," he said under his breath. Lily's chest tightened. The name was one she had read once in a business article. Clara Vaughn, James Carter's rumored fiancée, the woman who was supposed to become Mrs. Carter. Clara's eyes swept over Lily, then landed on Emma with a calculating expression that sent a chill down Lily's spine. "So it's true," she said calmly. "You disappeared from boardrooms and deals for this." "This is my daughter," James said, his voice hardening. "And this is none of your business." "On the contrary," Clara replied smoothly.
It's very much my business. The board is furious. Your shareholders are preparing lawsuits, and I have a reputation to protect. They're calling for a press conference tomorrow morning. They want answers. About your disappearance and about this little family secret you've been hiding. Lily felt the blood drain from her face. A press conference, cameras, headlines, her daughter's face on every news channel in the country. The thought made her stomach twist in fear. James stepped closer, his tone cold. If they want answers, they'll get them. And I'll tell them the truth, all of it. Clara's lips curled into a mocking smile. And lose everything you've spent a decade building? Be my guest. She turned to leave but paused long enough to glance over her shoulder. But when they strip you of your company and destroy your name, don't expect me to pick up the pieces. The car pulled away, leaving a trail of silence in its wake. Lily turned to James, her heart pounding. What is she talking about? She's right, he said quietly. If I go public about Emma, if I tell them everything, I lose control of the company. Everything I built will be gone. Then don't, Lily whispered. You don't have to. He looked at her with a kind of fierce determination she had never seen before. Yes, I do, because for the first time in my life I know what's worth losing everything for. And just like that, the battle lines were drawn. Tomorrow, the world would know the truth about the child he never met, the woman he never stopped loving, and the life he was willing to burn an empire down to protect. But what none of them knew was that someone else was watching too. Someone who would use that truth not to destroy James, but to destroy them all. And the real fight for their future was only just beginning. The night before the press conference was the longest of Lily's life. Sleep refused to come as she stared at the ceiling of James's penthouse guest room, listening to the rhythmic sound of Emma's breathing from the bed beside hers. Outside, the city stretched in a glittering silence, but inside her chest a storm was raging, louder than traffic and brighter than neon lights. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, their secret would no longer belong to them. James hadn't slept either. She could hear him pacing down the hallway, stopping occasionally at Emma's door to check on her like he was terrified she might disappear if he looked away. The man who once measured life in quarterly reports and profit margins now measured it in heartbeats and bedtime kisses. And tomorrow, that man would stand before the world and confess the truth that could destroy everything he had built. Morning arrived like a thief, too soon and too harsh. Cameras were already gathering outside Carter Global's headquarters, journalists swarming the steps like vultures sensing blood. Lily stood in front of the mirror, gripping the edge of the bathroom sink as she tried to steady her, shaking hands. She didn't belong in that world. Designer suits, billion-dollar scandals, press conferences. It was all too far from the life she had built out of duct tape and determination. But she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Emma. And for the first time in 8 years, she was fighting beside James, not against him. At 10 a.m. sharp, James stepped up to the podium. The room went dead silent. Hundreds of eyes watched him, cameras flashing like lightning, microphones thrust forward like weapons. He looked calm, composed, but Lily saw the truth in the tension around his mouth and the way his hands gripped the sides of the lectern. 8 years ago, James began, his voice steady but laced with emotion. I made a mistake that cost me everything that truly mattered. I chose ambition over love. I chose an empire over a family. And in doing so, I walked away from the woman I loved and the life we were supposed to build together. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Lily felt her heart pounding against her ribs. Emma, seated quietly between them, reached for her hand without looking up. But what I didn't know, James continued, his voice breaking slightly, was that when I walked away, I wasn't just leaving a marriage. I was leaving my daughter. I was leaving a part of myself I didn't even know existed. And that is the greatest regret of my life. The room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted questions, flashes popped, headlines were already being typed into devices. James raised a hand for silence. Her name is Emma, he said softly.
She is the best thing I have ever done. And from this day forward, I refuse to hide her existence or my love for her. Whatever I lose, whatever power or position is taken from me, it will never be more valuable than being her father. It was chaos. Investors panicked. Stock prices dipped in real time on scrolling news tickers. Clara appeared briefly at the back of the room, her face a mask of cold fury before she turned and walked away. But James didn't care. For once, the man who had built an empire with logic was speaking entirely with his heart. Hours later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the consequences of his confession began to unfold. Lawsuits were filed, board members called emergency meetings, anonymous threats arrived in his inbox. But the most unexpected reaction came from a different source. A single envelope slipped under the door of James's office with no return address. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of Emma walking home from school. On the back, scrawled in neat handwriting, were 6 words that turned James's blood to ice. Some secrets are worth more than gold. He stared at the photo in silence, his heart racing with a dread he hadn't felt since the day he'd realized he'd lost Lily. Someone knew about Emma, someone was watching her, and whoever they weren't just interested in scandal or revenge. They wanted something far darker. When Lily saw the photo, her legs nearly gave out. All the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the walls she'd built to protect her daughter, it had all been for nothing. They had made their truth public, and now it had put Emma in danger. "We need security," James said immediately, already on the phone with his head of operations. "I want eyes on her 24/7. No one gets near her without clearance."
Who would do this?
Lily whispered. James stared at the photo for a long time before answering. "Someone who knows that my weakness isn't money or power. It's her." That night, the penthouse became a fortress. Security teams patrolled the halls, cameras were installed at every entrance, and Emma was moved into the room nearest to James's own. But none of it was enough to quiet the terror that settled over them. Because as the first snow of winter began to fall outside their window, nothing became painfully clear. This was no longer just about second chances or lost love. They had entered a new battlefield, one where the stakes were far higher than heartbreak. And the first shot had already been fired. The first snowfall of the season blanketed the city in silence, but inside the Carter penthouse, there was no peace. Security guards patrolled every hallway and cameras blinked red like watchful eyes, yet Lily could not shake the feeling that someone was already one step ahead of them. The photograph of Emma still sat on the kitchen table, its edges curling slightly from being handled too many times. Every time Lily looked at it, her chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. Whoever had taken that picture had been close enough to follow her daughter undetected, and if they had been close once, they could get close again. James hadn't slept since the photo arrived. He spent the nights pacing the floor of his office, reviewing security reports and phone logs, searching for any clue that might reveal who was behind the threat. But no matter how many calls he made or how many resources he deployed, the truth remained just out of reach. Whoever they were careful, calculated, and patient. 3 days passed, and just as they started to believe the threat might have been a bluff, another envelope appeared. This time it wasn't a photograph. It was a note written in the same neat hand. "Secrets cost more than money. Pay the price or lose what you love most." There was no demand, no instructions, no account number, just a promise. Lily's hands shook as she read it.
"This isn't just about money," she whispered. "They're playing a game."
James nodded grimly. "And they're using Emma as the prize." They immediately contacted the police, but the detective assigned to the case was blunt. With no direct threat, no ransom demand, and no identifiable suspect, there was little they could do beyond increasing security. James doubled the team again, installing facial recognition systems around and the property and hiring former intelligence agents to monitor online chatter. But none of it made Lily feel safer, because deep down she knew whoever had started this wasn't going to stop. The next blow came when James's chief financial officer arrived unannounced one morning, pale and shaking with a folder in his hands. "There's a problem," he said quietly. "A major one. Someone's been siphoning funds from the company, millions, over the last 6 months. They've rerouted the money through shell corporations across 3 continents. We just traced the most recent transfer. It leads to an account registered under the name Harper." Lily's blood ran cold. "That's not me," she said immediately. "I would never." James held up a hand. "I know." But his face had gone hard with anger. "Someone is trying to frame you." The implications were chilling. Whoever was behind the threats wasn't just after Emma. They wanted to destroy James's empire piece by piece and drag Lily's name through the mud while they did it. The press was already sniffing around. Rumors swirled online about embezzlement and betrayal. Paparazzi camped outside their building, snapping photos of Emma on her way to school. "We're being cornered," James said late one night as they sat in the darkened living room whispering so Emma wouldn't hear. "They're not going to stop until they've taken everything." "Then we fight," Lily replied, her voice trembling but fierce. "We fight with everything we have." But their enemy was already a step ahead. The following afternoon, Lily received a call from Emma's school. Her daughter had never arrived. Panic surged through her like wildfire. Her hands trembled as she called James, who was already in his car before she could finish the sentence. Police were notified, roadblocks set up, security footage reviewed. But there was nothing. No sign of Emma. No witnesses. No VE. Hickley. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Hours later, James's phone rang from an untraceable number. The voice on the other end was calm, almost casual. "You've been very difficult to negotiate with, Mr. Carter, but now you understand the stakes. If you ever want to see your daughter again, you'll do exactly as you're told." James's grip tightened around the phone. "If you hurt her," the voice laughed softly. "We wouldn't dare. After all, she's far too valuable to damage. But make no mistake, one wrong move, and she disappears forever." The line went dead, leaving James standing in the middle of his office, shaking with rage and terror. Lily collapsed into a chair, her entire body trembling as the reality of their situation crashed over her. Their daughter was gone. Their enemy had finally stepped out of the shadows, and they had no idea who they were or what they wanted. But James's voice cut through the chaos, steady and cold, with a resolve that bordered on dangerous. "They want a war," he said. "Then they'll get one. I built an empire from nothing, and I will burn it all to the ground to bring her home." For the first time in 8 years, the man who once measured success in profit margins was driven by something far deeper. He wasn't a billionaire anymore. He wasn't a CEO. He was a father, and someone had just made the mistake of threatening his child. The city stretched beneath them, unaware that a storm was brewing, one that would pit power against desperation, wealth against vengeance, and love against everything that sought to destroy it. Somewhere out there, Emma was waiting, and James Carter was about to become the most dangerous man on earth to get her back. The night Emma was taken changed James Carter into a man he no longer recognized. Gone was the polished billionaire in tailored suits and boardrooms. In his place stood a father with fire in his blood and nothing left to lose. The city outside glittered with Christmas lights, but inside James's office, darkness reigned. He stood before a wall covered in maps, surveillance photos, and lines of red string connecting names and faces. Every contact he had, every resource he could deploy, every favor he had ever been owed, all were now focused on one mission: bringing Emma home. Lily moved like a ghost through the penthouse, her face pale and hollow from sleepless nights. She hadn't eaten in days, surviving on adrenaline and fear. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leapt with hope, only to crash into despair when it wasn't news of her daughter. Guilt gnawed at her like a living thing. She had promised Emma that love would keep her safe. Now Emma was in the hands of people who saw her as leverage. 3 days passed with no word. Then, just as they were beginning to fear the worst, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a tablet. When James powered it on, a video began to play. Emma sat in a chair in a dimly lit room, a blanket around her shoulders and fear in her eyes. But she was alive. A masked man stepped into the frame and spoke with calm authority. "You have 72 hours, he said. "Transfer full control of Carter Global to the holding company listed in the documents we will send, or the girl disappears forever. No police, no FBI, no tricks. One wrong move, and she vanishes." Lily's knees buckled, and James caught her before she hit the floor. The message was clear. They weren't after ransom money. They wanted everything: his company, his empire, his legacy, and they knew he would trade all of it for his daughter.
"Do it,"
Lily whispered through tears.
"None of it matters. Just bring her back."
James stared at the screen for a long moment, the war raging inside him visible in his eyes. "If I sign it, they might kill her anyway," he said. "They don't need her once they have Kant. Roll. We have to find them before the deadline." The next 72 hours became a race against time. James's security team traced the video signal to a warehouse district on the edge of the city, but when they stormed the building, it was empty except for a single clue, a silver pendant that Emma never took off. She had left it behind deliberately, a breadcrumb for her parents to follow. The trail led them deeper into a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts, each one pointing to a shadowy figure known only as the broker, a man rumored to specialize in corporate takeovers through blackmail and extortion. James had crossed him once years ago when he refused to sell a subsidiary. Now the broker had returned for revenge, and Emma was the weapon he would use to destroy him. On the final night, hours before the deadline, James received one last message, a set of coordinates and a warning. Come alone. Against every instinct, he went. He left his phone, his security team, even Lily behind, knowing they would kill Emma if he didn't follow instructions. The warehouse was old and abandoned, its broken windows casting long shadows across the floor. James walked through the darkness, his heart pounding with every step. Then he saw her. Emma, tied to a chair but unharmed, her eyes widening with relief when she saw him.
"Daddy!"
she cried. Before he could reach her, a figure stepped out of the shadows. The broker. He was older than James remembered, his face lined with bitterness and greed. "You should have sold when you had the chance," the man sneered. "But you wanted to play hero, and now your company, your empire, your daughter, all gone because of your pride." James raised his hands slowly. "You win. Take it. All of it. Just let her go." The broker smiled, savoring his victory. "Oh, I'll take it. But first, I want to watch you break." What he didn't know was that James had planned for this. He had suspected a trap and planted a tracker in the watch he had offered as part of the transfer deal. Outside, a team of federal agents and private security forces were already converging on the location. As the broker gloated, the building erupted in flashing lights and shouted commands. Armed officers stormed in from every entrance. The broker tried to flee, but James tackled him to the ground with a ferocity that stunned even the agents. Moments later, Emma was in his arms, sobbing into his chest as he whispered over and over, "I've got you. I've got you. You're safe now." The takedown made national news. Headlines spoke of corruption rings, corporate sabotage, and the billionaire who had risked everything to save his daughter. Carter Global's stock, which had plummeted after the press conference, soared again. But none of it mattered to James. The only victory he cared about was the one holding his hand as they walked out of the hospital a few days later. Weeks passed, and slowly, life began to heal. Emma returned to school, more resilient than ever. Lily and James attended counseling, working through years of pain and fear. And one evening, beneath a sky streaked with pink and gold, James knelt in the garden of their new home, a single white rose in his hand.
"Lily Harper,"
he said, his voice trembling.
"I loved you then. I love you now, and I will love you for every day we are given. Will you marry me? Again?
Tears streamed down Lily's cheeks as she nodded.
Yes, but this time, we do it right.
Months later, surrounded by friends and family, they said their vows once more. Not as two people trying to rebuild the past, but as a family determined to create a future. And when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Emma ran into their arms, shouting,
We did it! We fixed everything!
They laughed and cried and held each other close, knowing that life would still throw challenges their way. But they had learned the most important lesson of all, that love, when fought for with everything you have, could rebuild even the most broken of things. And as snowflakes drifted gently from the winter sky, James pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead and whispered the words that had become the foundation of their new beginning. No matter what comes next, we're a family. Always. It was not the fairy tale they once dreamed of. It was something far stronger. A story of redemption, resilience, and the unbreakable bond of love that even time, mistakes, and enemies could never destroy. And it all began with a $50 gamble and a bouquet of white roses. The end,